Remember when Universal Pictures was so confident in one movie that they greenlit the sequel, the TV show, and the theme park ride, all before opening weekend, and then watched the entire thing collapse in 14 days? Oh, I still remember walking out of the theater in 2004 after watching Van Helsing. I went in so hyped because I loved The Mummy so much. I thought, Stephen Sommers is gonna do it again. And then I walked out, not really knowing how I felt. It was big, it was loud, it was weird, but something about it just didn't fully click for me at the time. Fast forward 20 years, I rewatched it recently, and honestly, it hit different. Like that one dish you used to complain about when you were a kid, but now you suddenly crave it. It's still ridiculous, it's still over the top. But this time, I had way more fun, and I started wondering, maybe I was the one who wasn't ready for it back then. Because today we're diving into 15 facts about Van Helsing that even die-hard fans missed. Like which actor was so reluctant to play Dracula that the director had to bribe him with 3 international women and then married one of them in real life? Which Tony Award-winning Broadway star squeezed into size 24 shoes to play Frankenstein's monster and got called Daddy Monster by his own daughter on set? And which visual effects team literally hacked their own software using a program designed for cloth to rip human skin off a werewolf? Oh, but here's the thing nobody talks about. Van Helsing didn't just disappoint, it cursed an entire studio. And that studio made the exact same mistake. Not once, not twice, but 3 more times. That story is waiting for you at number 1. If you grew up renting monster movies on VHS and secretly loved the ones the critics hated, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe. We do this every single week. Let's go. Number 15. The director was too scared to call his own first choice. Stephen Sommers had his dream actress picked out for Anna Valerius and was too terrified to call her. Kate Beckinsale had just wrapped Underworld. Leather outfit, vampire world, crossbow in hand. Sommers looked at his own script, leather outfit, vampire world, crossbow in hand, and panicked. The similarity was too obvious. He never even approached her. But Beckinsale's agent got wind of the project, sent over the script without Sommers knowing. Beckinsale read it in one sitting and signed on immediately. She became the last lead cast member confirmed. And here's the kicker. She gained 10 pounds for the role on purpose. She wanted Anna to look like a woman who could actually fight a werewolf, not a runway model pretending to hold a sword. So the director was afraid his movie looked too much like Underworld. The actress didn't care, and honestly, she was right not to. But Beckinsale wasn't the only surprise on this production, because the places they filmed, some of them didn't survive. Number 14. Prague played every city in the movie, then one location caught fire. Quick geography quiz. Paris, Budapest, Transylvania, and Rome. How many countries did the crew actually visit to film all 4? 1. Prague's Old Town Square became Paris. The area beneath Charles Bridge became Budapest. A fully built temporary village next to Kunratice Chateau became the Transylvanian homeland. And Rome's Vatican, pure digital painting. But the real star was Pernstein Castle. This medieval fortress, roughly 20 miles northwest of Brno, doubled as Castle Frankenstein. 600 years of real history standing in for Hollywood fiction. Every crack in every wall was authentic, and then it burned. In April 2005, barely a year after the cameras left, a fire damaged Pernstein Castle. The building that survived centuries of wars and empires couldn't survive being famous. The temporary Transylvanian village at Kunratice, torn down after filming. The chateau itself has since fallen into disrepair. Its grounds became a parking lot. The movie's Transylvania was more beautiful than the real thing, and now both versions are gone. If a 600-year-old castle couldn't survive this production, imagine what it did to the people. Starting with the woman who was terrified of the one thing her character did most. Number 13. Dracula's Italian bride was absolutely terrified of flying. Silvia Colocca is terrified of heights. Not movie terrified, real life, white knuckle, don't look down terrified. So naturally, she got cast as a vampire who spends more screen time airborne than standing. Kolocka played Verona, the eldest of Dracula's 3 brides. The role required her to soar, dive, hang upside down, and attack from the sky. Every single flying scene, real fear, real sweat, acting layered on top of survival instinct, and the physical toll went beyond fear. The vampire bride makeup took 6 hours to apply every single day, motion capture suits underneath, long acrylic nails glued to their hands for months, meaning the actresses couldn't do basic things like open a water bottle. 6 hours in a chair, then 8 hours being dangled from wires, then scrubbing it all off at midnight, for 6 straight months in Prague. That's not a movie role, that's an endurance test. But Kolocka wasn't the only bride who went to extremes. The Spanish one did something even stranger. She studied actual animals to become her character, and what she discovered changed how she kissed on camera forever. Number 12. One bride studied bats. The other married Dracula. Elena Anaya walked into rehearsal and started moving her hands like claws. Slow, deliberate, predatory. The Spanish actress had been studying real bats. Not metaphorically. She watched hours of footage, how they hold their wings, how they cock their heads before striking, how they go perfectly still before a sudden attack. She brought all of it into Alira's mannerisms, the posture of the hands, the piercing glance, the way the nails move, and she made one creative decision that nobody asked for. She decided that Dracula and his brides wouldn't kiss like normal humans, too ordinary, so she incorporated bat behavior into every intimate moment on screen. Here's the thing about that level of commitment. It pays off, eventually, and somewhere else entirely. Anaya went on to star in Pedro Almodovar's The Skin I Live In, one of the most critically acclaimed Spanish films of the past 2 decades. She went from hanging upside down in a Prague wind tunnel to becoming one of Spain's most respected dramatic actresses. And the Italian bride, the one who was scared of heights, she married Dracula for real. But that story, the full version, is coming. For now, let's talk about the creature that stole the whole movie and the completely insane way they brought him to life. Number 11. ILM hacked their own software to rip skin off a werewolf. Stephen Sommers walked into Industrial Light and Magic with one demand: show me a werewolf transformation that nobody has ever seen before. Single shot. No cuts. No cheating. Every werewolf movie before this, An American Werewolf in London, The Howling, even the original Wolfman, used the same basic approach. Hair grows through skin, bones crack and reshape, the human becomes the beast gradually. Sommers wanted the opposite. He wanted the beast to explode out of the human, skin ripping apart as something monstrous forces its way through from the inside. ILM's solution was gloriously unhinged. They took their cloth simulation software, the program designed to make digital capes and fabric move realistically, and repurposed it to simulate human skin tearing apart. Cloth software, simulating flesh. Nobody had ever done that before. They also rolled multiple witness cameras from every angle during the actor's physical performance. Every muscle twitch, every contortion was captured and mapped onto the digital werewolf. The result? Over 1,400 visual effects shots. Massive for 2004. And here's what makes this a fever dream of irony. The werewolf transformation, built with hacked software and creative desperation, became the single most praised visual element in a movie that critics called CGI overload. The one thing everyone loved was the thing they almost couldn't build. The technology was revolutionary, but the business side of this movie, that's where things get painful. Because Universal didn't just plan a film, they planned an empire, and they picked a very specific date to launch it. Number 10. May 7th. Universal's cursed calendar trick. May 7th, 1999. May 7th, 2004. Same studio, same director, same release date, very different endings. Universal deliberately scheduled Van Helsing to open on the exact 5th anniversary of The Mummy. Same director, Stephen Sommers, same genre, monster action-adventure. Same hope, franchise money, but the math didn't cooperate. The Mummy cost around $80 million and grossed over $400 million worldwide. Van Helsing cost $160 million and brought back $300 million. On paper, $300 million sounds fine. In reality, after marketing and distribution, Universal barely broke even. The sequel they'd already greenlit, dead. The NBC TV series called Transylvania, about a Texas cowboy who becomes sheriff in a monster-infested town, cancelled 2 weeks into Van Helsing's theatrical run. Universal had even paid to keep the Prague sets standing for future projects. Those sets were eventually torn down. The cowboy sheriff never rode into Transylvania, and the franchise that was supposed to rival The Mummy became a cautionary tale. Producer Bob Duxay said it best. The movie did very nice business, but it just didn't get to that level where the studio felt like they had to make another film. $300 million, and it wasn't enough. And this, right here, is where the curse begins. Not ends, begins. We'll come back to that. Okay, take a breath. We've covered a director too scared to call his own star. A castle that burned after pretending to be Frankenstein's home. 3 vampire brides who endured 6-hour makeup sessions and genuine terror. A werewolf made from cloth software. And a $300 million movie that still wasn't enough. Here's a question for you, and I mean this. Drop it in the comments right now. Did you see Van Helsing in theaters in 2004? Or did you discover it later on DVD? Because I think the answer changes how you feel about everything that comes next. I have a project that by every objective measure did not perform the way I hoped, and I still think it's some of the best work I've ever done. Watching Stephen Sommers talk about Van Helsing 20 years later, how the audience cheered at that screening in Seattle, it reminded me that sometimes the thing you're most proud of just needs time. The studio saw a business plan. He saw a love letter to his dad. And when the business plan failed, they almost threw the love letter away too. If you've ever made something you're proud of while the world just shrugged, you know exactly how that feels. Now, stick around, because we're about to talk about the critic who broke ranks, the actor nobody in his own country recognized, and one of the most beautiful love stories to ever come out of a dumpster fire. This back half? It hits different. Let's keep going. Number 9. Roger Ebert gave it 3 stars. The rest of the world gave it 24%. 24%. That's the score Rotten Tomatoes gave Van Helsing. 224 critics weighed in. Roughly 1 in 4 said anything positive. Metacritic was worse. 35 out of 100. The critical consensus used words like hollow and CGI overload. The Razzies piled on with multiple nominations, including Worst Supporting Actress for all 3 vampire brides, not individually, collectively, as if they were one giant, makeup-covered disappointment. But one voice broke ranks. Roger Ebert, arguably the most influential film critic in American history, gave Van Helsing 3 out of 4 stars. He wrote that Sommers has somehow succeeded in assembling all his monsters and plot threads into a high-voltage climax. 3 stars from the man who co-created the thumbs-up system, while everyone else sharpened their knives. I'll say this much. When Roger Ebert disagrees with 200 other critics, I pay attention. Ebert left us in 2013, but his Van Helsing review has become the single most cited piece of evidence in the film's slow, quiet reappraisal. 20 years later, the movie that critics buried is being called criminally underrated by a growing cult following. The kind of people who rented it at Blockbuster on a Friday night, watched it twice, and quietly never returned it. Sometimes the crowd is wrong, and sometimes it takes 2 decades to prove it. Speaking of voices nobody expected, the next fact involves one of the most recognizable voices in cinema, playing a character you'd never guess. Number 8. Hagrid played Mr. Hyde, and one actor played 2 monsters on the same set. The voice coming out of Mr. Hyde's mouth belonged to Hagrid. and nobody in the audience knew it. Robbie Coltrane, the warm, lovable giant from the Harry Potter films, voiced the entirely CGI Mr. Hyde. But the process was anything but warm. ILM filmed Coltrane reading his lines from 3 separate camera angles simultaneously. Every facial twitch, every smirk, every snarl was captured and mapped onto Hyde's digital face. But here's where it gets weird. The physical stand-in for Mr. Hyde during the fight scenes on set, that was Shuler Hensley, the same actor who played Frankenstein's monster. One man physically embodying 2 different classic monsters in the same movie. He'd shoot a Frankenstein scene in the morning and stand in as Hyde in the afternoon. Coltrane left us in October 2022. Van Helsing was one of his rare villainous performances, a snarling, mocking, vicious creature buried under layers of digital paint, the opposite of everything he was known for. And he made it work, because underneath all that CGI, you could still feel a real actor performing. You just didn't know which one. But if you think playing 2 monsters is impressive, the actor who played Dracula did something even rarer, something only one other person in history has ever done, and the other guy, Orson Welles. Number 7. Sherlock Holmes, Professor Moriarty, Count Dracula, same actor. Name an actor who has played Sherlock Holmes, Professor Moriarty, and Count Dracula. You have 5 seconds. The answer is Richard Roxburgh. And unless you count Orson Welles, who did all 3 in separate radio programs decades earlier, Roxburgh is the only other human being in the history of performance to pull off that triple crown. Sherlock Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles, 2002. Professor Moriarty in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, 2003. Count Dracula in Van Helsing, 2004. 3 of fiction's most famous characters, 3 consecutive years. 1 Australian actor most Americans couldn't pick out of a lineup, and that might be the most Roxburgh thing about Roxburgh. Hollywood gave him 3 of the biggest names in literary history, and he took them home to Australia and became something better. He starred in the hit legal drama Rake for 8 seasons. He played former Prime Minister Bob Hawke. He appeared in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. He directed an award-winning film. He won more acting awards than most people know exist. The campiest Dracula in cinema history became one of Australia's most decorated serious actors. If that isn't a pop culture phenomenon in reverse, nothing is. But Roxburgh wasn't the only Australian on this set that nobody recognized, because the biggest star in the entire cast, back home, he was invisible. Number 6. Nobody in Australia knew who Hugh Jackman was. The casting people in Australia said, and this is a direct quote, "Who the hell is Hugh Jackman?" Let that sink in. The man who would become Wolverine for 24 years. The actor who would earn an Oscar nomination, win a Tony, headline The Greatest Showman, and eventually star in a movie that grossed over $1 billion. That man, in his home country, was nobody. Stephen Sommers wrote the role of Gabriel Van Helsing specifically for Jackman. Fresh off X2, Jackman was becoming a global phenomenon. But in Australia, the real heartthrobs were his co-stars. David Wenham, who played the comic relief Friar Carl, was a leading man. Richard Roxburgh was a matinee idol. Jackman, an afterthought. He even started the shoot wearing hair extensions because his hair was still too short from another production. He grew it out over the 6-month Prague shoot, becoming Van Helsing gradually, physically, 1 inch at a time. Sommers' one casting rule was simple: I just want to work with nice actors. The casting team pushed back. They wanted great actors. Sommers said both. And somehow he found Jackman. 20 years later, Hugh Jackman is one of the most famous human beings on planet Earth. And somewhere in Sydney, David Wenham is absolutely fine with how things turned out. But there's another actor on this set who knew exactly what it was like to be overlooked. A Broadway star who watched the same system that rejected Jackman hand him a Tony Award for the same show. That connection between them, it goes deeper than anyone realizes. Number 5. A Tony Award winner walked into Castle Frankenstein wearing size 24 shoes. Stephen Sommers, walked into a Broadway theater in 2003 and watched a man play a misunderstood monster. He'd found his Frankenstein. Shuler Hensley had just won the Tony Award for Best Featured Actor in a Musical as Judd Fry in the revival of Oklahoma. The dark, lonely, terrifying Judd, opposite Hugh Jackman's charming Curly. They'd performed together in the London production in 1998. Hensley's take on Judd was so unsettling that Summers recognized something immediately. This man understood monsters. But here's the part that stings with irony. When Oklahoma transferred from London to Broadway, Actors Equity wouldn't grant the pre-X-Men Jackman a work exemption. Their reason? He wasn't deemed a big enough name to justify bringing an Australian to New York. The American-born Hensley was allowed to stay. He won the Tony. Within 2 years, Jackman was the biggest movie star on the planet. On set, Hensley wore massive prosthetic makeup, thick body padding, and enormous lifts in size 24 shoes to appear over 7 feet tall. His 3-year-old daughter, Skylar, visited the set in Prague. After the initial terror wore off, she started calling him Daddy Monster, a name that stuck for the entire 6-month shoot. When filming wrapped, Hensley was contractually signed for a Van Helsing sequel. He recorded voice work for the video game. He saw the Frankenstein's monster action figure for the first time. He was ready to go back. That call never came. He went on to play Frankenstein's monster 2 more times, in a concept album and in Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein on Broadway. The role followed him home, but the franchise that started it, the franchise left him behind, just like it left everything behind, including a theme park ride that almost nobody remembers. Number 4. The theme park ride that lasted exactly 2 years. On May 7th, 2004, you could walk into a theater and watch Van Helsing on screen, then walk next door and ride it. Universal Studios Hollywood launched a Van Helsing haunted house attraction on the exact same day the film premiered. On opening day, you could smell the fog machines from the parking lot. They replaced their existing mummy attraction with it. The franchise confidence was that total. The thinking was simple. Even if the movie underperformed, the ride could build a cult following over time. It worked for Waterworld. That stunt show outlived one of the most famous flops in history. Van Helsing's attraction did not get the Waterworld treatment. It lasted 2 years. Closed on November 4th, 2006. Quietly replaced by Universal's House of Horrors, which was later rethemed to The Walking Dead, which was later rethemed to something else entirely. And here's the nightmare fuel twist. In 2025, Universal opened its brand new Epic Universe theme park in Orlando, featuring an entire land dedicated to Universal's classic monsters called Dark Universe. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, all represented, but not the Van Helsing versions, the 1930s originals, the black and white icons. Universal built a permanent monument to the monsters Van Helsing tried to reinvent and pretended the reinvention never happened. The ride lasted 2 years. The erasure lasted forever. But at least a theme park ride is just concrete and paint. What happened to the man who built this entire world, the writer, the director, the architect of the whole thing? That's not erasure, that's something worse. Number 3. Saw, director Universal made, and then broke. Before Van Helsing, Stephen Sommers was the man Universal trusted with everything. After Van Helsing, they stopped returning his calls. Let's be specific about the before. The Mummy, 1999, cultural reset. The Mummy Returns, 2001, massive sequel. Combined worldwide gross, over $800 million on budgets under $100 million each. Sommers wasn't just a director, he was the guy who figured out how to make old monsters feel new. Universal handed him the keys to their entire monster kingdom. Van Helsing was supposed to be his coronation. It became his exile. After the film underperformed, Sommers was attached to direct Night at the Museum, dropped out over creative differences. He directed G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra in 2009, solid numbers, mixed reception. Then Odd Thomas in 2013, a small-budget film almost nobody saw. And then, not much. Meanwhile, and this is the part that keeps me up at night, Universal kept trying to build the exact monster franchise Summers had attempted. Without him, without calling him, without acknowledging that the blueprint was his. In 2024, at a screening event in Seattle, Summers watched Van Helsing for the first time in 20 years. The audience cheered. He hadn't seen it since opening night in 2004. The film is dedicated to his late father, the man whose basement monster movie marathons inspired the black and white prologue that opened the whole thing. He built a love letter to his dad. The studio saw a business plan, and when the business plan didn't work, they threw away the love letter too. A franchise crumbled. A director lost his momentum. A theme park ride closed. A Broadway star waited for a call that never came. Everything about Van Helsing fell apart, except for one thing. One completely unexpected, impossibly romantic thing that survived all of it. And it started with 6 words at a script reading. Number 2. Dracula married his bride. At the very first script reading in 2003, an Italian actress walked up to an Australian actor and said 6 words. "Hi, I'm Sylvia. I'm your Italian bride." Richard Roxburgh didn't even want to be there. He'd been reluctant to take the role of Dracula from the start. Too campy, too big, not the kind of serious work he preferred. Summers held meeting after meeting, trying to convince him. At the last one, the final pitch, Summers played his trump card. "Okay, Richard, this is my last meeting with you. This time I'm going to try to convince you by saying I have just cast the 3 brides of Dracula. One is Italian, one is Spanish, and one is from California. Come on, you must do it." Roxburgh said yes, and at that first read-through, Sylvia Coloca introduced herself. She later said she was totally enamored the second I saw him. They fell in love during the 6-month Prague shoot. On September 25, 2004, the same year the movie came out, they married at a medieval castle in Tuscany. A real castle, a real wedding. Dracula married his Italian bride. They moved to Sydney, had 3 children, Raphael, Miro, and Luna. Coloca became an Australian citizen in 2013. She pivoted from acting to cooking, hosting Sylvia's Italian Table on Australian TV, then Cook Like an Italian on SBS. She wrote a cookbook, recorded an opera album that debuted at number 1 on Australia's classical charts, performed alongside Andrea Bocelli. A franchise died. A director was sidelined. A theme park ride was demolished. A Broadway star waited by the phone. But Dracula and his bride, they built something that outlasted all of it. The movie gave them a fictional love story. They wrote a real one. And now, take everything you've just felt, the warmth of that ending, the proof that something good came from all of this, hold on to it. Because the studio that greenlit their love story learned absolutely nothing from the movie that created it. What Universal did after Van Helsing, the mistakes they repeated, the franchises they killed, the pattern they couldn't break, that's not a footnote, that's the whole point. And it's been waiting for you since the first 10 seconds of this video. Number 1. The movie that cursed a studio 4 times. Remember that franchise Universal greenlit before they sold a single ticket? Let's talk about what happened next. Van Helsing was the MCU before the MCU existed. Think about it. 5 classic monsters: Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, Mr. Hyde, and Igor, all sharing one interconnected universe. A Vatican-based secret organization called the Knights of the Holy Order, functioning as a proto-shield, a planned sequel, a spin-off TV series, an animated prequel, a Dark Horse comic, a tie-in video game. This was 2004, 4 years before Iron Man, 8 years before the Avengers. Nobody had tried anything like this before, and nobody was ready for it. And you'd think Universal would have learned something from it. No, they didn't. Here's the timeline. Brace yourself. 2012. Universal announces a Van Helsing reboot. Producers attached. Tom Cruise reportedly set to star as the Monster Hunter. Then the project morphs. Cruise moves to the Mummy instead. 2014. Dracula Untold, meant to soft launch a shared monster universe, flopped, rendered non-canon almost immediately. 2017, The Dark Universe, Universal's official do-over, Tom Cruise in The Mummy, Russell Crowe as Dr. Jekyll, Johnny Depp signed as the Invisible Man, Javier Bardem as Frankenstein's monster. They took a cast photo, they did a press tour, they announced the whole slate. The Mummy made $410 million worldwide and was still considered a disaster. 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. The Dark Universe collapsed within weeks of its own launch announcement. That cast photo became one of the most mocked images in Hollywood history. And here's what ties the whole thing together. Tom Cruise was reportedly supposed to play Van Helsing in that universe, the character that started it all, the role that launched a curse 13 years earlier. He switched to The Mummy instead, and the curse followed him. 2020, Universal announces yet another Van Helsing reboot, James Wan producing, Julius Avery directing. As of today, still in development, still waiting, still cursed. 4 attempts, 4 failures, same studio, same monsters, same dream, and every single time, the result was worse than Van Helsing, because here's what nobody at Universal seems to understand. Van Helsing wasn't a flawed business plan. It was a love letter, from a director to his dead father's basement, from a kid who grew up watching Dracula and Frankenstein on a flickering TV screen. You can't franchise a love letter. You can't spreadsheet nostalgia into a billion-dollar universe. The Invisible Man, 2020, directed by Lee Whannell with Blumhouse, worked because it was a standalone story. No universe, no franchise, no cast photo, just one filmmaker, one monster, and one story worth telling. That's what Van Helsing was, underneath all the CGI and the $160 million price tag. One filmmaker, every monster he loved, one story. 20 years later, the critics gave it 24%, the franchise gave it nothing. But the fans gave it something the studio never could: time. And time turned a box office disappointment into one of the most gloriously unhinged monster movies ever made. Van Helsing cost $160 million, earned $300 million, killed a franchise, ended a director's golden era, broke a studio's confidence, and somehow became more loved 20 years after release than the day it premiered. That's either the greatest failure in Hollywood history or the weirdest success story. Possibly both. Here's my question for the comments. Was Van Helsing ahead of its time, or was it always exactly what it was meant to be? A beautiful, chaotic, oversized love letter that was never going to fit inside a franchise? Drop your answer. I read every single one.